Jonathan Ward strode down the pristine corridor of Nexus Station, his boots clicking against the polished floor. The overhead lights, set at a steady glow to simulate an Earth-like day, illuminated the lines of tension on his face. As a commander in the Earth Alliance Security Division, he had grown accustomed to patrolling the perimeter or dealing with rowdy smugglers passing through, but today's summons to the station director's office had come with an unusual directive, and he was already bracing himself for trouble. According to the official briefing, a high-profile diplomatic guest named Lady Erin Thalaron was causing more than her fair share of disruption aboard Nexus Station. 3 officers had already requested reassignment, citing her complete disregard for regulations, her propensity for sneaking into restricted zones, and her knack for stirring up drama wherever she went. He had never met a Verdant before, but the rumors were impossible to avoid. Green skin, silver hair, and a regal bearing that belied an unpredictable temperament. Her father was High Counselor Thalaron, a powerful figure in the Verdant Conclave. The Conclave had sent Lady Erin to Nexus Station under a diplomatic exchange program. Officially, she was here to promote cooperation and cultural understanding. Unofficially, it sounded like she viewed the station as her personal playground. Jonathan sighed the moment he reached Director Hale's office. Hale, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and perpetually worried eyes, beckoned him inside. The office windows overlooked the station's vast docking bay, where multiple starships from different species were moored. Outside, the swirl of cosmic dust and distant stars formed the station's perpetual horizon. "You wanted to see me, Director?" Jonathan asked, stopping just short of Hale's desk. "Yes, come in, Commander." Hale looked exhausted. A datapad rested in front of him with Lady Erin's file open. "I've got a special assignment for you, if you can call it that." Jonathan waited. Hale tapped his datapad and a hologram lit up. It showed the image of a striking woman with emerald skin, silver-white hair cascading to her shoulders, and intense gray eyes. She was undeniably beautiful, yet something in her gaze hinted at defiance. "This is Lady Erin Thalaron," Hale said. "She's been here for 2 weeks as part of the diplomatic exchange program. 3 security personnel have already requested to be transferred off her detail. She's difficult, willful, disrespectful, and thoroughly convinced that our station rules don't apply to her. We can't keep rotating staff around forever, so I need my best officer to keep her in line." Jonathan inhaled slowly. "My duties usually involve large-scale security oversight, not personal babysitting." "I understand," Hale said, dragging a hand over his face. "But the Verdant Conclave is extremely important for Earth's interests. If Lady Erin continues to flout every rule, we could spark a political incident. We need to rein her in, and from what I hear, you have the right mix of patience and backbone. And if she won't listen," Hale raised an eyebrow, "then you do whatever's necessary to ensure she complies with station protocols, so long as you don't provoke the Conclave to declare we've mistreated her. Tread carefully, but do your job." Jonathan gave a crisp nod and left the office. He could feel the tension already starting to coil in his stomach. On top of everything else, there were rumors about Krell mercenaries skulking around the outskirts of Nexus Station's territory. He would have preferred to coordinate security sweeps for potential mercenary threats, not shadow an alien aristocrat with a taste for mischief. It didn't take him long to find Lady Erin's assigned quarters. Suite 119, located in one of the station's more luxurious wings, featured a panoramic window looking out onto the swirling purple-blue nebula beyond. He keyed the door chime. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. Finally, he overrode the lock, stepping inside with caution. The interior was all plush furniture, satin drapes, and decorative sculptures from various worlds. Dim ambient lights cast soft shadows across lounge chairs and end tables. Jonathan spotted a half-finished glass of bright red liquid resting on a side table, but no sign of Lady Erin. "So they've sent another one," came a languid voice behind him. He spun to see her leaning against the wall near a darkened alcove. Her gaze swept over him from head to toe, the corner of her lip curling upward. "I'm Commander Jonathan Ward," he said, maintaining his composure. Security Division. I'll be in charge of ensuring your safety and adherence to station regulations. Is that so? She took a languid step forward. A sharp metallic sheen glimmered in her silver hair. I do wonder how long you'll last. The others found me too exasperating. Jonathan refused to let himself be provoked. I've read the reports. You won't succeed in driving me off with pranks or insults. She tilted her head, her hair shifting with a liquid shimmer. And what if I don't want a minder following me around? This station is so dreadfully dull if one obeys every rule. Your compliance isn't optional, Lady Erin, he said firmly. I intend to do my duty. She laughed, the sound melodic like a set of crystal chimes. We'll see about that. Within the first hour, she tested him by slipping out of her suite when he wasn't looking, vanishing into the corridor. By the time he caught up to her, she was snooping around a restricted maintenance area near the station's environmental controls. When Jonathan cornered her there, her expression was blatantly amused. Trying to see how your precious oxygen recyclers work, she teased. Is that so wrong? I'm here on a cultural exchange. The maintenance tunnels are off limits, he said in a clipped tone. Are you deliberately ignoring me? Her emerald lips curved into a smirk. Commander, ignoring you would deprive me of half the fun. Then she just brushed past him and strutted back toward the main hallway. He sighed inwardly, following her as ordered. 3 times that day she broke some form of protocol, wandering into an engineering substation, hijacking an announcement console to play some verdant melody across a small corridor, and accidentally unlocking a storeroom for specialized equipment. Each time Jonathan had to step in and rectify the situation. Each time she gave him that same half-smile, as if daring him to do something about her. By evening, Jonathan's patience was wearing thin. According to the official diplomatic schedule, there was a small reception in the station's grand atrium with delegates from several star systems. He escorted Erin there, suspecting she might attempt to stir more trouble. Sure enough, the reception was a swirl of color and sound, with representatives from 6 species. A tall, blue-scaled Aquarian was discussing trade routes with a short, broad-shouldered humanoid from the far side of the galaxy. Servers flitted about carrying trays of exotic beverages. Crystal chandeliers reflected rainbow prisms across the polished floor. Erin drifted among the dignitaries, her posture elegant, her laughter sweet. But Jonathan caught glimpses of a calculating expression in her eyes. She eventually approached one of the servers and took a glass of a rare, shimmering liquor that many considered a delicacy. Jonathan lingered at the edge of the gathering, close enough to intervene if she tried anything, but not so close as to disturb the delegates. Then, in a single deliberate motion, Erin poured the entire glass onto the immaculate floor, drawing gasps from those nearby. A slip of the hand, she announced, though her smirk said otherwise. Humans can be so uptight, can't they? Jonathan was at her side instantly, speaking low so only she could hear. That was unnecessary. She shrugged. And I suppose you're going to punish me now, Commander? He inhaled slowly, reining in his frustration. You're making a scene. You're disrespecting the station. Let's move away from the crowd. Oh, I do love causing a stir, she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Yet she allowed him to guide her out of the spotlight before the station's cleaning drone zipped in to handle the spill. Once in a quieter corner, she turned to face him. You're no fun, Commander Ward. This station has protocols that apply to everyone, including you, he said, voice still low. I suggest you follow them. She leaned closer, clearly testing his boundaries. Or what? Don't find out. Her tone was half mocking, half fascinated. The other guards used to sputter with rage. You just stand there, acting calm. What are you hiding behind that uniform and that stoic face? He regarded her calmly. Boundaries, Lady Erin. I know you're unfamiliar with them, but it's time you learned. She let out a soft laugh that ended on a challenging note. We'll see who ends up learning something. Then she placed her empty glass on a nearby ledge and strolled off into the throng of delegates, leaving Jonathan to rub a hand across his forehead. It was going to be a long assignment. The following day, a rumor reached Jonathan that Krell mercenaries had been sighted near the outer docking rings. Station sensors had picked up anomalies as if someone were probing the perimeter, seeking vulnerabilities. Jonathan personally oversaw a security sweep, leaving one of his junior officers to keep an eye on Aaron while he scanned logs, verified docking records, and checked for suspicious transmissions. By the time he returned to the main decks, he discovered his subordinate in a near panic. Lady Aaron had vanished yet again. He found her in a restricted corridor, having apparently overridden a security lock. Her bright laughter echoed off the metal walls, and a deep flush of annoyance threatened to break Jonathan's composure. She turned around at his approach, eyes gleaming. "Ah, Commander, took you long enough." He noticed she held a small panel from the corridor's control console, as though she had been tinkering with the wires. "What did you do?" She waved the panel in the air. "I was curious how Earth Alliance tech compares to ours. The lock you use here is child's play for anyone with a bit of skill." "That's not the point," he muttered, stepping forward to retrieve the loose panel. "You have no clearance to be in this area. I can't allow you to keep doing this." She gave him a careless shrug. "Then stop me. Or are you only here to lecture me yet again?" His jaw tightened. He replaced the panel carefully, then spun back to face her. "If lecturing worked, you'd have stopped after the first time. You're leaving me no choice but to enforce station protocol in a far more direct way." He grasped her wrist, not painfully, but firmly enough to signal that he would not tolerate further resistance. She stiffened, as if surprised by his resolve. For the first time, genuine uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "I've warned you," Jonathan said quietly, struggling to keep his temper in check. "Since you refuse to heed words, maybe a stronger message is in order." Her lips parted, ready with some retort, but he promptly escorted her back to her suite and locked the door behind them. The tension in the air was palpable. "All right, Commander," she said, voice tinged with a new edge. "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" He didn't answer verbally, only guiding her over to a chair in a corner. She made a half-hearted effort to pull free. "This is absurd." "You gave me no choice," he repeated, sitting down and pulling her over his lap in one smooth motion. Her eyes flashed wide. "You can't be serious. Watch me." He delivered 3 firm swats to her backside, more symbolic than painful, but enough to get the point across. She emitted a startled sound, equal parts anger, shock, and perhaps a hint of something else. The moment he set her back on her feet, she stood there in stunned silence, her face an even deeper shade of green as she tried to process what had just happened. "No one has ever done that to me," she hissed, drawing herself upright. "I'm a member of the Verdant Royal Line, and I'm a commander charged with upholding station security," he said calmly, meeting her furious gaze. "You have repeatedly defied protocols. This is the consequence." She glowered at him, breathing heavily. "You're unbelievably arrogant." "I'm doing my job," he responded in a controlled tone. "If you want to keep testing me, be my guest, but the outcome isn't going to change." She pivoted away, arms folded protectively around herself. For a moment she was silent, and Jonathan wondered if he'd gone too far. Then she turned back, a spark of defiance still burning in her eyes, yet tempered by a hint of respect he hadn't seen before. "You'll regret that," she whispered, "but perhaps not in the way you think." He kept his face impassive. "I'll take my chances. Now, you're to remain in your suite for the next few hours. If you try to leave, I'll know." She didn't respond, merely staring him down. He left with a curt nod, re-engaging the security lock behind him. Only when he stood in the hallway alone did he allow himself a deep exhale. He knew the political risk he'd just taken. If Lady Aaron decided to report this to her father, or to the station director for that matter, he'd be in a precarious position. Yet something in him sensed that she needed precisely that kind of firm boundary, or matters could escalate far beyond a mere diplomatic slight. 2 hours later, Director Hale summoned him. Entering the office, Jonathan braced himself for the worst. Maybe Aaron had already filed a formal complaint. But instead, Hale looked more exhausted than ever, rubbing his temples in frustration. "Commander, I just received a communication from Lady Aaron," Hale said. "Strangely enough, she told me she wants to continue under your supervision and that she's satisfied with your performance." Jonathan arched an eyebrow. He could only imagine the conversation that preceded that. "I see," Hale shook his head. "I don't need the details, Commander, but I do need to know if this assignment is still workable. She's clearly not a typical dignitary." "I can handle it," Jonathan replied. "She wants to push limits, but I believe we're making progress." Hale gave a weary nod. "Very well. Also, be aware our security logs indicate multiple attempts at unauthorized docking requests near the outer rings, likely tied to Krell mercenaries. Increase vigilance. We don't want them sneaking on board." Leaving the office, Jonathan mulled over the puzzle of Lady Aaron. Perhaps behind the mischief, she was testing whether anyone would stand up to her. Still, it was a precarious road. He wondered just how far she planned to push him next. Over the next few days, Jonathan devoted himself to double-checking station security in light of the rumored mercenary threat. He had a strong suspicion someone was interested in kidnapping or harming Lady Aaron. Her father was a powerful figure in the Verdant conclave, and interfering with her could cripple negotiations between Verdant and Earth. If an unknown faction wanted to sabotage that alliance, abducting or injuring Lady Aaron would be an effective method. She of course acted oblivious to any danger. Though she toned down her more blatant pranks, there was still the occasional breach, like the time he caught her attempting to stroll into a restricted hangar bay. But these moments became less frequent. If he confronted her, she glowered and reminded him of what happened last time. Yet oddly enough, she obeyed more readily when he told her no. There was even an instance, during a midday walk through the promenade, when a group of children accidentally scattered in front of her, dropping a bag of candies. Aaron stooped down to help them, her expression surprisingly gentle as she gathered the sweets. It was such an unexpected moment of kindness that Jonathan found himself momentarily disarmed. Later that evening, the station's sensors blared an alarm. Jonathan's communicator lit up with the voice of Lieutenant Ress, one of his subordinates. "Commander, we've got an unauthorized landing in Docking Bay 5. Sensors indicate multiple armed individuals disembarking. They match the profile of Krell mercenaries." Jonathan felt a jolt of adrenaline. "Lock down that section. Inform Director Hale." "I'm on my way." He ran toward Lady Aaron's location, which he tracked through the station's internal system. She was in a public lounge on Deck 12, sipping some fluorescent beverage. By the time he arrived, the lounge was near empty, with citizens rushing to secure areas at the sound of the alarm. Aaron remained seated, an almost bored look on her face. "Commander, do calm yourself," she said as he approached, slightly breathless. "Is there some new drama unfolding?" "Krell mercenaries have boarded," he said tersely. "We need to get you to a safe zone. Now!" She studied him, perhaps recognizing the intensity in his voice. "Fine. Lead on." He motioned for her to follow. They hurried along the corridor as emergency lights began flashing. Over the station's intercom, a neutral AI voice declared, "Attention all personnel. Security breach in progress. Docking Bay 5 on lockdown. Civilians, proceed to designated safe rooms." Jonathan guided Aaron toward the upper decks, where the diplomatic quarters had reinforced blast doors. The plan was to shelter her there while security teams neutralized the mercenaries. But halfway to that location, the corridor lights flickered and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through a vent. Jonathan realized the mercenaries had likely forced open interior passages. He checked a map on his datapad. "Change of plan. We can reach the main security station through these maintenance corridors, then regroup. Follow me." Aaron rolled her eyes but complied. Jonathan led her through a narrow passage, override codes in hand. They were nearly past a sealed hatch when heavy footsteps clattered close by. He held up a hand for silence, peering around a corner. 3 reptilian Krell were advancing, their scaled skin glinting under the station's emergency lights. Each carried a plasma rifle. Jonathan motioned for Aaron to stay behind cover. Then, with controlled efficiency, he opened fire with a pulse pistol. The corridor lit up with bursts of energy. One mercenary fell, stunned. The other two ducked behind a supply crate. Erin pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide. For all her bravado, real danger was less amusing. Bullets of hot plasma sizzled past. Jonathan winced as one bolt grazed his shoulder. He retreated a few steps, scanning for a better angle. The Krell advanced, hissing orders in their guttural language. Then Erin did something unexpected. She slipped out from behind him, pressing forward to a spot where the corridor's ventilation shaft was exposed. She drew a small device from her belt that emitted a faint glow. "What are you doing?" he hissed. But she only winked in reply. She triggered the device and a faint, transparent mist spread through the corridor. The two Krell who were about to open fire again paused, shaking their heads as though dizzy. Their eyes glazed over. Jonathan seized the moment, firing precise shots that stunned them. Both collapsed in a clatter of limbs and equipment. He stared at her, breathing heavily. "That was... My people produce certain pheromones," she said with a triumphant grin, tucking the device away. "A condensed aerosol can disrupt some species' neurofunctions temporarily. Now you know why we Verdants have quite the reputation in certain circles." "Impressive," Jonathan managed, scanning the area for more threats. "But let's keep moving." They navigated a series of cramped tunnels, guided mostly by the emergency lights. Every so often they heard distant shouts or the crack of weapons discharging. Over the comm, various security squads reported pockets of resistance. The Krell were searching for something. Or someone. Reaching an intersection, Jonathan noticed a cluster of frightened civilians huddled behind sealed doors. He quickly keyed in an override to open an alternative route, ensuring the mercenaries wouldn't find them. Arian helped coax a panicked child to move deeper into the safe zone. It was surreal seeing her cast aside her usual sarcasm to comfort strangers. At last, Jonathan and Erin arrived at the security station, a fortified area with reinforced walls and armed officers. Lieutenant Reese greeted them with obvious relief. "Commander, they're pushing into the main concourse. They've taken hostages near the commercial district. Word is they're specifically demanding the Verdant representative." Erin swallowed, her expression turning grim. "They want me." "Then they won't get you," Jonathan said. "What's our best move, Lieutenant?" Reese pointed to a live feed. A group of about a dozen Krell herded civilians into an open area. "We've locked down most corridors, so they're trapped in that section. But they've threatened to kill hostages if we don't hand over Lady Erin. We can't risk that," Jonathan muttered. "We need a plan to incapacitate them quickly." He turned to Erin, noticing the flicker in her gaze, half nervous, half determined. "Is there a vantage point I can use my pheromone aerosol again?" she asked. "If I can get close enough, I can disorient them, give your men time to strike." "That would be risky," Jonathan said, heart pounding. "They might shoot you on sight." "They might," she agreed, lifting her chin. "But I won't stand by while innocent people die for a feud that has nothing to do with them. I'm not just some spoiled aristocrat, remember?" He remembered how she had navigated the maintenance corridors, how she had saved them from those mercenaries earlier. If she was serious about helping, he wasn't going to deny her. He nodded, though every protective instinct screamed at him not to put her at risk. They formulated a plan. Reese and a squad would circle around the concourse, cutting off the Krell's escape routes. Jonathan and Erin would approach from an adjacent service hallway, concealed by partial cover. Once Erin released her pheromone mist, the security team would strike. Every nerve in Jonathan's body felt tight as they approached the concourse. Even Erin, for all her bravado, clutched the aerosol device in tense fingers. They reached a maintenance hatch overlooking the open area. Dozens of civilians cowered behind overturned tables. Krell mercenaries, all bristling with weapons, stood guard around them. One hissed orders in a guttural voice. "Bring the Verdant, or we start shooting." Jonathan surveyed the environment. There was a vantage point near a set of large decorative pillars. "I can get you behind that pillar. From there, your mist might affect most of them, but they'll notice you within seconds." "That should be enough time," she said, exhaling slowly to steady her nerves. They made their move. Jonathan fired a volley of stun shots, drawing the Krell's attention. Immediately, the mercenaries returned fire, plasma bolts scorching the edges of the hatch. Under the cover of that distraction, Erin slid into position behind the pillar. She peeked out just enough to toss the tiny aerosol canister toward the mercenaries. The device hissed, releasing the shimmering gas into the air. It worked startlingly fast. One by one, the Krell convulsed with confusion, swaying as they tried to focus. Some dropped their weapons. The hostages sensed an opportunity and scrambled for safer ground. That was when Race's team, lying in wait, rushed in from a side corridor and overwhelmed the mercenaries. But not all the Krell were within range of the mist. One of them, farther back, spotted Erin the moment the device landed. With a snarl, he aimed his rifle at her. Jonathan, perched above, saw it happen in slow motion. He scrambled for a shot, but the mercenary squeezed the trigger. A plasma bolt lanced out. Jonathan abandoned his vantage point, leaping down to intercept. He tackled Erin, shielding her with his body as the bolt scorched the pillar behind them. The impact jarred them both. For an instant, everything was chaos. The roar of weapons fire, the screams of terrified civilians, the swirl of smoke. When the dust settled, Race and his squad had subdued the remaining Krell. Medics rushed to assist the hostages. Jonathan realized with relief that neither he nor Erin was badly injured. He helped her to her feet, her gaze locking with his. "You saved me," she said, slightly breathless. He managed a strained smile. "And you saved them." He gestured to the civilians, now gathered safely near the back. "Looks like we owe each other." They shared a moment of mutual respect. There was no smirk, no sarcastic retort from her, just a solemn nod. Then she glanced at his shoulder, where the earlier graze had burned through his uniform, leaving a charred line and blood seeping beneath. She instinctively pressed a hand to it, concern clouding her gaze. "We need to get you to the infirmary," she said. "That can wait," he replied. "First, we make sure the hostages are safe and the mercenaries are fully secured." Within the hour, station security had the Krell in custody. Director Hale arrived, practically running to Jonathan's side with a wave of relief. Hale exclaimed that the crisis had been contained, though multiple corridors were damaged. Jonathan, bandaged by a medic, was about to escort Erin back to her quarters when her personal communicator chimed. A stern, older man's voice crackled through. Her father, High Counselor Thalaron. "You are unharmed, I trust," came the voice, icy in its politeness. "I am well, Father," Arian said stiffly. "I have heard of the Krell incident. We will speak more on this later, but for now there is another matter. Your marriage arrangement with Admiral Talaran is being finalized. The official ceremony will be in 3 weeks. Return home at once." Erin's knuckles went white around the communicator. Jonathan caught her eye, seeing the sudden dread there. She quickly ended the call without further pleasantries. Tension carved lines in her face. "I see you're not thrilled," Jonathan said softly. She let out a harsh breath. "My father arranged a political marriage ages ago. He's accelerating it now, presumably because it'll strengthen certain trade routes. My life has always been about what's best for the Conclave, not what I want." "You can refuse, can't you?" Jonathan ventured. Erin laughed bitterly. "Refuse? That would mean severing ties with my family, my people. I would lose my title, possibly be exiled, and my father would never forgive me. There's no easy way out." She turned away as if embarrassed. "I'm not used to showing vulnerability, Commander, but after everything I've seen here, how you risked your life to protect me and others, I can't just go back to being a pawn." He hesitated, reached out to place a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's figure this out. If you really don't want that marriage, maybe there's a way to demonstrate it's not in the Conclave's best interest. We need evidence that the same group that hired the Krell might be trying to sabotage this alliance." She considered his words. "Yes? If we can prove there's a conspiracy, maybe my father would at least delay the wedding. I've gleaned quite a bit about Verdant political structures, and if I can link these mercenaries to one of Admiral Talaran's rivals, that might change everything." In the days that followed, Jonathan and Erin worked side by side, combing through confiscated datapads from the Krell, cross-referencing suspicious transmissions. She had an uncanny ability to spot relevant political names, references to verdant power blocks, and coded messages. He brought his security expertise to bear, analyzing station logs and verifying flight data. The more they unearthed, the clearer it became that the Krell were not freelancing. They had been paid through proxies linked to a faction in the Centurion fleet, rumored to be allied with Admiral Talaran's longtime adversaries. If Admiral Talaran's wedding to Erin solidified the Conclave Pact, these adversaries would lose territory and trade routes. One evening, bent over the desk in the small office they had commandeered, Erin paused, massaging her temples. I never realized how tangled these power struggles were until I started looking at it from your station's perspective. He glanced over. You all right? Just tired, she admitted. Between the stress of the attack, sorting through data, and the upcoming confrontation with my father, I can hardly sleep. But I'm grateful you're here. Her candid admission struck him, reminding him how far she had come from that rebellious woman who poured drinks on the floor just to provoke him. He smiled gently, resisting the urge to place a reassuring hand on hers. We're almost done. Another hour or two and we should have enough proof to request a formal investigation. She nodded. Let's do it. After another stretch of cross-checking, they compiled a damning file of communications tying the mercenary intrusion to a Centurion faction determined to sabotage Erin's marriage alliance. The next morning, she tried to present the findings to her father via a holocall. It did not go as planned. High Counselor Thalaron listened icily, then dismissed the evidence as circumstantial. He insisted that the wedding proceed without delay. The call ended with him ordering her to remain on Nexus Station until the official summons to Verdant. That same day, a looming frustration hovered over Erin. She paced restlessly in her suite. Jonathan eventually approached her, uneasy about her mood. She wore a simple, light-hued jumpsuit that contrasted starkly with her emerald skin, and her silver hair was tied back, revealing the tense line of her jaw. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. She stopped pacing. I'm going to fight. My father never taught me submission. I picked up rebellious habits because no one ever told me no, but now I see I have bigger battles to win. If he won't consider this evidence, then I'll use the one method Verdant law can't ignore, the challenge of merit. He recognized the phrase from the small bits of Verdant culture he'd studied. The challenge of merit was an ancient tradition that allowed a Verdant of suitable rank to reject an arranged union by demonstrating a more worthy match. It was rarely invoked, mostly because it was dramatic and risked offending multiple families if it failed. You're serious, he said, crossing his arms. That means you have to name someone as your challenger against Admiral Talaran. She fixed her gaze on him. Yes. And I name you Commander War. His mind reeled. Me? I'm just a security officer. I don't have the rank or... Her chin lifted. According to the Earth-Verdant Treaty, you hold authority on this station. You've proven your worth by protecting me, by uncovering conspiracies that my father refuses to see, and by showing me the difference between real boundaries and manipulative constraints. You're more worthy in my eyes than any politically convenient fiancé. He didn't quite know how to respond. If this goes badly, you could be exiled from your people, and I could lose my position, or worse. She took a step closer, her silver eyes luminous. You said it yourself. Sometimes you have to take a risk. It all came to a head that afternoon. High Counselor Thalaran arrived in person, flanked by a small entourage intending to inspect the station's security after the Krell debacle. Rumor had it Admiral Talaran's representatives were also aboard. Word spread that the marriage was to be officially confirmed soon. In the station's central conference hall, an impromptu council convened to discuss the wedding and to finalize certain diplomatic protocols. Arian marched in, wearing formal Verdant attire that shimmered with changing hues of turquoise and emerald. Jonathan accompanied her, drawing stares from every corner. As soon as Thalaran began discussing the wedding details, Arian stepped forward. I invoke the challenge of merit, she proclaimed in a clear voice. I reject the arranged marriage to Admiral Talaran on the grounds that I have found a more worthy match. Gasps rippled across the hall. Thalaron's face darkened to a deep, furious green. Admiral Telerin, a tall, imposing verdant in ornate robes, glowered in offense. Jonathan felt every eye in the chamber pivot toward him as Aaron announced his name. Silence stretched taut. "This is madness," Thalaron snapped. "Commander Ward is a human, an Earth Alliance officer. This is a direct insult to our traditions." Aaron stood her ground. "Your traditions permit me the right to challenge. Do you deny your own laws?" He looked ready to declare the entire tradition void. Then Admiral Telerin raised a hand, a cunning look in his eyes. "If she wishes to challenge me, let the challenge of merit proceed. Once I defeat her so-called champion, the matter is settled." Jonathan met Aaron's gaze, reading a silent question. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" He drew in a breath and nodded. He stepped into the open area, facing Admiral Telerin. The tradition required 3 tests: mind, body, and spirit. If either side won 2 out of 3, they prevailed. Jonathan had never participated in such a ceremony, but the rules were explained swiftly by a verdant elder officiating. The test of mind came first, a puzzle that required strategic thinking, ironically reminiscent of some Earth Alliance war games. Telerin had the advantage of years of political maneuvering. Jonathan had the advantage of a soldier's discipline and problem-solving. The puzzle ended in a near tie. The officiator declared it too close to call and assigned a draw. Next came the test of body. The elder explained that it need not be lethal, merely a demonstration of prowess. Jonathan, muscled from his years of training, stepped onto a small combat circle with Admiral Telerin, who removed his ornate outer garments to reveal a lean physique and the ridges characteristic of verdants. They squared off. Telerin moved with surprising agility, and for a moment, Jonathan struggled to match the alien's swift footwork. Eventually, Telerin managed to land a blow that threw Jonathan off balance. The elder signaled the round in Telerin's favor. For the final test, spirit, they brought out a verdant device, a shimmering orb that reacted to honesty, sincerity, and emotional truth. The challenge was for each competitor to state their intentions, the authenticity of which would be measured by the orb's color. Admiral Telerin spoke first, proclaiming his lineage and promising beneficial trade ties. The orb glowed a steady blue, confirming that he believed in what he said, that a union between him and Aaron would strengthen the conclave. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He hesitated, feeling every pair of eyes on him. He cleared his throat. "I never intended to challenge this union for personal gain," he began quietly. "I did it because I respect Lady Aaron as an individual, not a commodity. I believe she has the right to choose her own fate, just as we all do, and I couldn't stand by while she was used for someone else's agenda." He paused, glancing at her. She watched him with an unreadable expression. "When we first met, she was reckless and rebellious, and I was frustrated. But over time, I saw someone brave, someone who cared enough to risk her life for others, someone who deserved more than a forced marriage. My intention isn't to seize political power or undermine the conclave. My intention is to stand beside her, if that's what she truly wants." As he spoke, the shimmering orb brightened to a stunning golden hue. The elder officiating was momentarily taken aback, remarking that he had seldom seen such a radiant display. Admiral Telerin's face twitched, betraying a flash of apprehension. The elder turned to the assembly. Telerin won the test of body, the test of mind was a draw, and now the test of spirit is decisively in Commander Ward's favor. By tradition, if the final test carries exceptional significance, the Council may rule on the outcome. High Counselor Thalaron was visibly torn. His daughter's future alliance was slipping away from his careful manipulation, yet the entire hall had witnessed Jonathan's sincerity, and so the Council, half challenged by Aaron's boldness, half impressed by the orb's powerful glow, convened in whispered debate. At length, they declared the challenge of merit in her favor. Admiral Telerin's mouth tightened, but he bowed stiffly, stepping aside. Aaron let out the breath she'd been holding. She turned to her father, bracing for an outburst of rage. Instead, Thalaron regarded her with an inscrutable look. Finally, In a grave voice, he said, "You have proven your resolve in a manner our laws recognize. I will not deny the verdict." Relief swept across Erin's face. She inclined her head in a gesture of respect. He stepped away, flanked by his advisors. Moments later, the crowd began to disperse, hushed conversations brimming with shock and speculation. Erin and Jonathan found themselves alone at the edge of the dais. She turned to him, a tremor in her hands as she raised them to his shoulders. "You were incredible. You risked everything for me." He gazed at her, exhaling slowly. "I believed in you." She offered a tentative smile, her eyes bright. "Well, Commander, it seems we've rewritten the script, or begun rewriting it anyway. Who knows what the future holds?" They left the conference hall side by side. In the days following, with her arranged marriage contract dissolved, Erin agreed to remain on Nexus Station temporarily, acting as a formal liaison for the Verdant Conclave. High Counselor Thalaron departed, his dissatisfaction clear, but bound by the ruling of the Council. Admiral Telleran and his entourage likewise left in silence, presumably to regroup politically. A month later, Jonathan found himself standing in front of the wide observation window in Erin's suite, now partially redecorated to her more moderate taste. The swirling nebula outside spun slowly, its cosmic dust forming faint ribbons of color. He had just concluded an extensive station-wide security update, ensuring there would be no more infiltration attempts by mercenaries or conspirators looking to sabotage alliances. When Erin approached, she wore casual station clothes, far less extravagant than her earlier gowns. She stood beside him, gazing out at the stars. "I didn't think I'd ever say this," she said softly, "but being on Nexus Station almost feels like being home. Not because of the place itself, but because I'm free." He glanced sidelong at her. "Free to do what you want without your father's demands?" She gave a small nod. "Free to decide who I want to be, without constantly testing boundaries just to see if they exist. You showed me that boundaries can be about caring, not control." He reached out, gently brushed a strand of silver hair from her forehead. "I'm glad you see it that way." She turned slightly, looking up at him. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken acknowledgments of how far they had come from antagonistic beginnings to mutual respect, to something else that might blossom in time. "Commander," she said with a playful tilt of her head, "if I ever misbehave again, are you going to give me that same discipline?" He felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but he held her gaze. "I hope you won't need it, but I'll do what's necessary to keep you safe." She laughed softly. "Such a serious answer. That's who I am. That's who I need you to be," she murmured, stepping closer until their shoulders touched. "And maybe, from time to time, I'll remind you that life should also be lived freely, with a hint of mischief." He slid his arm around her waist, just enough to let her know he welcomed her nearness. The station's lights dimmed slightly as the artificial night cycle began. Beyond the glass, the stars remained eternal witnesses. In that quiet moment, the swirl of politics, conspiracies, and interstellar tension seemed far away. They had secured the station from mercenaries, disarmed a political marriage, and challenged the traditions of an entire alien culture. Though the future contained no guarantees, they had forged a partnership. Erin was no longer the rebellious alien princess who refused to listen, and Jonathan Ward was no longer just a stoic soldier chafing at his assignment. They were two people, two worlds, meeting in the middle, bound by respect, trust, and a spark that might one day grow into something more. And if the stars shining through the panoramic window were any sign, their adventure was only beginning.